I wanted to start kind of back at the beginning when I joined the IPFS team, and everything that the IPFS team has been doing kind of over the past years at this point, but past while, that has laid the foundation for Filecoin, and that Filecoin has now built on top of. And so really thinking about how a lot of the tools and technologies in IPFS, libp2p, and IPLD contributed to the building of Filecoin. There's a ton of components here over time and groundwork that was laid that enabled Filecoin to kind of accomplish what it has, and to so quickly become an awesome tool that many groups in the ecosystem are building on top of. And so that journey started, probably honestly long before Filecoin was even a major project, with the IPFS community evolving to identify that sharing content and being able to find it was like a really critical core component to a resilient storage network. And so the existence of IPFS and then the nucleation of IPLD and libp2p out of it, just straight up, is like a very core building block that was involved in the growth and evolution of Filecoin. But even once Filecoin kind of became its own project after 2017 and started having its own development team and building its own open source community, there were a lot of ways in which the ties of what was being built in IPFS and libp2p flowed into what Filecoin could utilize and benefit from as a technology building on top of the same stack. And so wanted to highlight a couple of the different things that have happened over the past year and a bit that have all gone in and been utilized by the Filecoin network now that it's kind of flowing into the world. And so one that was in the early days of when I first started out on the IPFS team was graph sync. And so back in, I think this was early 2019, IPFS, the main data transfer algorithm that we use when connecting two nodes with each other is called BitSwap. And BitSwap is really good for kind of session management, being able to have a one-to-many or many-to-many data exchange kind of algorithm so that you can quickly assemble from many different nodes the data that you want. However, not super great for deep graphs, because every request, every time that you go down a layer of your Merkle tree, it requires another round trip and another round trip to get the children and the children and the children and children. Now think about a really deep graph like a blockchain, you end up in a pretty rough situation where just the round trips in order to load that data and to traverse your way to the parents and the parents and the parents of your current block would become prohibitive. And so that's where the concept of graph sync and IPLD selectors came in. This was a solution that would benefit all blockchains that would utilize things like IPFS and IPLD, but was also motivated around other use cases of kind of deep graphs of data. You could think like any kind of a CRDT style operational transform where you're layering new updates over and over and over again, and you have a history back in time and you want to fetch that entire subgraph all in very few round trips. That's what GraphSync was created for. And there was actually, Hannah gave an awesome talk on this yesterday. And so if you want to understand the deeper workings of that, but that was one of the first problems and challenges taken on specifically with the thought in mind of, all right, how could blockchain clients utilize these core modular components? And then it can come back into IPFS as a more general use case of empowering the fetching and transfer of deep graphs. And I think that highlights some of the principles that work in play here as well around having very flexible, modular, kind of composable solutions. So a stack that's interoperable, that allows you to select the transport or the algorithm that's most valuable for your use case as a developer. That's one of the core principles in kind of how this interplanetary stack combines together to enable a whole very diverse ecosystem of parties who are maybe not even using Go IPFS itself, but are using the core building blocks and components, like how Filecoin is using many of the core components of IPFS, but doesn't wrap IPFS itself. So GraphSync was the start of that, but that definitely continued on as well. Filecoin also uses BitSwap, which is the precursor to GraphSync for the data transfer between many different nodes. And it also uses the DHT. And it instead of using it for content discovery, it uses it for peer discovery. So when, in addition to the Bootstrap nodes and anyone you connect to kind of directly by dialing them through like Gossip Sub, it also uses the DHT to find peers in the network and connect you to people you want to sync the blockchain from. And so IPFS did a number of projects kind of before understanding that these are going to be massive problems, but that flowed downstream into Filecoin as a user. And so there was a chunk of work done around BitSwap and improving BitSwap performance. This was in collaboration with Edgar from Netflix, working on the kind of package manager space where you want to very quickly be syncing graphs of data to each other, nodes who are many nodes who are all looking to synchronize content quickly. We made a ton of improvements to BitSwap, especially around understanding whether you do or don't already have a message, and then not getting duplicate messages from many different nodes in the network, which is super valuable for Filecoin as well, where you don't want to be sending duplicate data all across the network. Similarly, for the DHT, we made some massive performance improvements that landed in IPFS 0.5 back in, it was May, which just was a huge update to the DHT, added some significant improvements to how nodes advertise themselves, and node hole punching, map hole punching, and a ton of the core selection logic of how you query down the DHT. And so that's also very useful for Filecoin to make sure that when we have many miners in China and around the world, that they can connect to each other, they can find each other, and they can exchange peer records so that everyone's kind of resiliently connected. Another even more recent chunk of work happened also in libp2p on Gossip Sub v1.1. And so this was a huge chunk of work that the libp2p team took on, specifically looking at use cases around Ethereum 2 and Filecoin, both of whom were really making libp2p the core networking library of blockchains, where there's a significant financial incentive if you can disrupt or manipulate them. And so it was a very thorough analysis using TestGround, which is the peer-to-peer simulation and analysis tools that we built up in order to improve the IPFS DHT and be able to simulate and measure that effectively. We then used those on Gossip Sub in order to look at and model and simulate the different attack dynamics around these various kind of abuse vectors that we were researching and looking at around blockchains, and how libp2p could mitigate those. And there was a ton of work done there. David has a great talk on it. I think Giannis presented on the paper that was written on Gossip Sub v1.1 yesterday. And so that kind of understanding and seeing those downstream use cases also flowed back into improving Gossip Sub and really helping it come into its own. It's been kind of an optional or experimental with an IPFS for a little while, but this really helped us like bring it more fully into a kind of full use case and with major downstream applications depending on it, which really helped improve it and solidify it. So that was huge. I guess to mention TestGround as well. That was another major area that the IPFS and libp2p teams who came together recognized that neither of these protocols and projects could improve effectively without better testing and modeling tools, without being able to see the impact of a change and an optimization ahead of time in a simulated network and simulated conditions before rolling them out to millions of weekly active users whose applications and tools depend on the effective functioning of the IPFS network or libp2p protocols. And so identifying that need for TestGround and going and building it into its own kind of standalone project and tool, then also was massively valuable for Filecoin, kind of in a couple of different ways. we were able to bring that technology to bear on the Filecoin network itself, spinning up many different Lotus nodes, running them in a coordinated network, and being able to simulate all sorts of message passing dynamics and edge cases that are very difficult to simulate in a test net or a dev net, and we speed up time so that you can actually much more quickly, like in CI, see whether or not your changes have caused new issues, created regressions, slowed down performance instead of speeding it up. And that's exactly the sort of toolbox that we need as protocol developers in order to be constantly improving and growing the protocol. Because if you don't have a fast feedback loop, then your cycle time of making improvements out into the wild and your error rate goes way up. And so tools like that were developed initially to help us improve the IPFS DHT flowed downstream to Gossip Sub and then to Filecoin as well. And now we've actually seen kind of some of those same practices and tools flow into the test vector cases developed kind of, again, by the test ground team that's helping with cross-implementation compatibility and conformance testing, which I think Raul talked about yesterday. So that's a number of the many ways in which IPFS, libp2p, and IPLD, of course, contributed to building Filecoin. I guess one more I'd highlight that maybe almost Filecoin contributed back to IPFS as well was the CAR file format. This was something that had been around and been in design for a really long time, but recognizing that, large logical chunks of Merkle data, we want to ship it around and really quickly transfer it between nodes, and realizing how effective that could be as a means of like plugging and playing data in the IPFS network. The IPLD team went and built up the specification and kind of created the low-level tooling around it, added it into Filecoin and into IPFS. You can now import and export CAR files of data, and it's magical. It adds a really improved capability around kind of just logically working with Merkle data that hadn't existed before, but there was like a need and we hadn't quite solved the problem. And so I guess that's an opportunity as well, where we were involved in that creation, but hadn't quite crossed that gap until we had a really clear use case, like the necessity of CAR file formats for shipping around data in the Filecoin blockchain case. Cool. So to switch gears a little bit, the IPFS ecosystem has been growing exponentially over the past year. Just over a year ago, we had IPFS Camp, which was kind of the first gathering of about like a 200 plus IPFS developers and projects and demos. And it was just this amazing kind of demonstration of how broad and wide the ecosystem is. And that was like, a kickoff point where it's like, wow, so many things are coming online. And then just to see that kind of evolve and take off, like many groups coming in to plug different infrastructure layers into the tech stack. So Textile building up a lot of SDKs and tooling and kind of empowering many other developers, Pinata and Infura coming in as pinning services to help with persistence of data in the IPFS network. A lot of these kind of lower level tools empowered the next layer of developers, which kind of came in the March timeframe when Fleek and Unstoppable Domains and ENS and a number of other groups like really came into their own, and there was just this amazing flourishing of DWeb content where many kind of building on top of those tools that had kind of come into existence around this time, a little bit before this time last year. 6 months later, there was the next layer, the next level of tooling that could build on those foundations and then deliver something even closer to the user, even more seamless, even more directly connected into the expectations or defaults as a developer you'd be coming from Web2. So like, literally a Netlify on IPFS building on top of the foundations of Textile and others. And so that's the same thing that IPFS ecosystem growth is doing with Filecoin as well. One, bringing over all of these amazing like developer tooling ecosystem partners. So Textile, Fleek, Pinata, Infura, all these groups are also now excited and investing in the Filecoin ecosystem. So Textile Powergate is like, the go-to solution for building dApps that back up data to Filecoin and do Filecoin retrieval requests and things like that. Fleek has built the Space Daemon, which kind of similarly is just really leapfrogging the sort of developer experience. And so having these groups already built up onto IPFS and P2P, already building tooling that's like really accessible to large developer groups is kind of a superpower that kind of is flowing into the Filecoin network. And we've already seen the way that that's impacting things with like Filecoin Ignite, how quickly kind of hundreds of projects and teams were able to spin up on using this tooling. I think the number of projects on IPFS alone through Filecoin Ignite was like over 100 projects in the first month. And so that's, you can imagine if that's what you get within a month, 6 months from now, think of all of the projects that will have evolved from there into new use cases, into the next level of infrastructure, which can then support a whole new flowering of projects. And so I think that's a very close way in which the IPFS ecosystem and the Filecoin ecosystem are like interlinked. They are in so many ways the same community and ecosystem, or at least very highly overlapping. And so, and they incentivize and grow each other. So adding in the incentive layer of Filecoin to people who are already operating in the IPFS space opens up new business models. It opens up new features and new efficiencies. Talking to the Pinata team, they've been building an IPFS pinning solution for a long time. They had been working on it, but one of the challenges was their AWS costs were just really, really high. They're really struggling to offer a service at a price point that helped them survive, helped them be a good, solid, sustainable participant in the ecosystem, but that also supported all of their downstream users. And it's really cool to see Filecoin, even on day one, being able to like massively reduce that cost pattern and give them a new feature to offer to their users while meeting some of their users' biggest needs and complaints. So very much win-win and bringing more people to these ecosystems together to solve problems. So that's super exciting. Thinking a little bit about kind of what these technologies unlock for Web3. The criticism for Web3 is hard to use, under focus on things like developer UX and on reaching populations that are not already in the early adopter space that caught the fire of Web3 and blockchain in the early days, and actually reaching out to more communities. And I think IPFS and Filecoin have some really good fodder and an opportunity to lead the charge in that space. Of course, we're always learning so much from the way that the Ethereum ecosystem has reached out to like an immense number of communities and really engaged everyone's creativity and passion and formed like a really phenomenal ecosystem. But I think there's a lot of opportunities for Filecoin and IPFS in kind of the more enterprise space. Blockchain is something that is kind of a buzzword and isn't always like clear how it adds value or where it adds value. Whereas cloud storage is something that's like near and dear to every large enterprise's heart. And the performance gains around being able to kind of ship data and disseminate data in a cloud native way is also like cutting edge from what most large businesses are thinking about. And so I think the domain area of Filecoin and IPFS has the potential to open a lot of doors for projects that hadn't previously considered that blockchain could be for them. And so I think that's a really massive opportunity, especially coupled with the incentive structure around truly driving down storage costs, especially for very large amounts of data, where, you know, petabytes of data gets prohibitive on any cloud service, and having the incentive structure of Filecoin really pull not only any data, but especially like the Filecoin Plus program data could make it, you know, almost, Ryan Zerr was saying this morning, negative interest rate style will pay to store your data sorts of use cases for humanity's most important information. That's pretty exciting, pretty impressive, and unlocks some businesses who I think wouldn't have considered the Web3 space in, you know, from a, you know, that's new, that's cutting edge, that's something that maybe is untried, untested, but you're much more willing to try something, or if you think there's an opportunity for a really large discount on a cost you're already paying. And so I think that that has an opportunity to really speak to the business aspect of decision making from many organizations that are excited to continue investing. And finally, thinking a little bit about the future. Along those lines, one of those areas when we think about groups bringing on big data to IPFS and Filecoin, super exciting to think about the sorts of use cases that are going to be unlocked and the sort of businesses that never could have existed before. And so I think there's some really interesting opportunities there around data that supports itself, that grows itself, and that kind of expands over time. And so I think there's a huge opportunity there for kind of innovation along those angles, and like, you know, the adoption and ecosystem cases for what's coming in the future. Like, it's going to blow our minds. There's going to be new things that we've never even thought about that 6 months, 12 months from now will be coming online in the network, and will take people by storm, the way that, you know, .eth addresses and using Fleek to get up a Web3 site, that just like was a fire that swept the Web3 community and brought others into the Web3 community. I think we're going to see some really, 2021 is going to be super exciting along those lines. More technically for these particular protocols and communities, I think that the combination of pressures within these three is going to be really exciting for development and just like core technical velocity. With IPFS, like, we're going to see through Filecoin, through this incentive structure, larger and larger amounts of data coming onto the IPFS network. You know, to upload and to share your data on Filecoin, most people start by adding it to IPFS. It's the easiest thing to do. And so I think we'll see a lot of improvements there required around how the DHT supports large scale publishing, maybe alternate content routing models, kind of borrowing some of the incentive understanding from Filecoin to think about the retrieval market and how that will intermesh with IPFS. And I think, you know, when you think about how the DHT works right now for publishing content, that's an area in particular that I think we'll be very focused on in the first couple months of the year. Is, you know, when you have Internet Archive's scale data sets that are being brought into the Filecoin and IPFS ecosystem, how do you publish that content in a way that scales? How do you route around that content? You know, what efficiencies can we get right now? You know, every time we want to add a data set, we're republishing every block of content every 24 hours. And that's just not going to be scalable when you have petabytes and petabytes of data. So there's going to be some really interesting innovations there around you know, changes into how we publish content and how that affects the structure of the network and how you find data. We were also talking earlier about indexes and other, you know, new niches forming in the ecosystem for others to help route others to content, such that you're not doing a random walk and query, but that you're able to go to nodes and parties who spend time forming a niche as a router of information. I think that'll be super interesting. We also, of course, have continued improvements to like last mile connections. Like, again, lots of people use IPFS and libp2p in all sorts of internet environments. And so thinking about NAT traversal as it affects your home Wi-Fi and whatever node you might be running inside your house, or things like the Great Firewall. How do we make sure that nodes can stay connected in all sorts of dynamic situations? We spent, I kid you not, like a week and a half during the beginning of Space Race, working with all of the nodes in the Filecoin network to make sure that folks could get connected, stay connected, make deals with each other, send data back and forth. And it, was a difficult process. So how do we make the defaults there work for the 99.99% of cases so that everyone can be really resiliently connected to each other and exchange data and participate? On the libp2p side, I think we should be super excited for some of the kind of classical components of libp2p coming with new opportunities for kind of incentives or payment channels or ways to kind of propagate content with an eye towards marketplaces and incentive systems. So I'm super interested. This may or may not be a next year, might be a year after next thing, but things like incentivized pub sub, incentivized DHTs, doing things like offline republishing. So, I as a node, if we're thinking back to that IPFS case, and I want to publish all of the Internet Archive, how could I incentivize other people to help republish subtrees of the content that I care about and shard it across many nodes? Can I have more flexible structures here? Can I, pay and select for people in the network to continue propagating content even after I, as the host or router, go offline? And then finally, Filecoin, we're barely a week into the Filecoin mainnet, so it's really crazy to think about where we'll be even just a week from now. Again, so much progress is happening here. Filecoin's already innovated massively. I believe we're the first implementation of EIP 1559, which had a new proposed gas model for Ethereum, which we iterated on a little bit, implemented, and are kind of evaluating and analyzing within Filecoin's network. And so I think we'll continue to see great ideas from other networks as a thing that we can learn from, like be agile to implement and utilize quickly, and then have a feedback loop of surfacing back to other groups how they've worked, and vice versa. The solutions that we come up with to help scale and improve Filecoin may also be things that we can then share and broadcast to other blockchains. Of course, like every blockchain, we'll be making lots of improvements on those angles around scalability and throughput. I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here that we can continue working on. We're working on things like chain checkpointing. We already have, a very sizable chain because we have, so much data being onboarded to the network, and so making sure that we have a pretty flexible checkpointing model so that we don't have to sync nodes from scratch every time folks want to join the network is definitely an important area. And then also thinking about things like light nodes, browser nodes, and groups who want to be able to make storage and retrieval deals from the browser and interact with Filecoin without having to sync the entire chain. That's also a work in progress that I think, we may even see it before 2021, but that will unlock a lot of the retrieval use cases and make them, there's already a ton of progress that's happened on the retrieval side, but it will make it much more lightweight for many, many people to participate from their phone, from their IoT device, from wherever they are, without having to run like a full heavy Lotus node. And so I think that'll be a really interesting area. And then of course, the other Filecoin implementations, we have 4 implementations of Filecoin, 2 in Go, 1 in C++, and 1 in Rust. And they're all getting very close to full interoperability. So I think we'll be starting up a DevNet in just, probably the next couple of weeks with all 4 interoperating implementations on them, and then bringing them onto the mainnet. And then those implementations also specializing and focusing on different sub areas, whether that's kind of performance around chain sync, whether that's mining pools, or whether it's kind of usability and interconnectedness with other ecosystems, or working on various different device types or things like that. And so I think there's a lot of things that we'll see there as each of those implementations kind of innovates forward and brings back new suggestions, new FIPS to the Filecoin community for how we can keep improving. So super excited about that. Cool. Well, I'm officially at time. Should route people over to Juan's keynote talk to wrap up the day. If you do have other questions after that, I believe we're going to be hosting an AMA this evening in maybe like 2 hours from now. And thank you all so much. I don't see any questions. So I'll just wrap up and hopefully see you all on the internets. Have a wonderful rest of Filecoin liftoff. Thank you all so much for helping make Filecoin a reality and for the immense contribution to IPFS, libTV, Filecoin, IPLD, DRAM, multi-formats, all of the projects that are helping make this a reality, and excited to continue working with this amazing community.